Welcome to the Positively Healthy Mom podcast, where positive parenting meets well-being. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Positively Healthy Mom. I'm your host, Laura Ollinger, teen and parent well-being coach. And today I'm super excited to introduce you a guest that I've been following on Instagram and that I have loved her advice. And so that's why I invited her on. I was so excited that you accepted my invitation. So Jenna from the College Navigators, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Laura, for having me. I'm so excited to be here today. I love your audience too. I feel like we work with a very similar audience, so I
Yeah.
think this is such a great fit for us.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I'm super excited about this conversation because, as I mentioned, I am in this exact season of life. So, my oldest is a rising senior in high school. I also she has 3 younger siblings. So, we're going to be doing this whole college navigation process many times, 4 times for me. And the first thing that came to mind just in envisioning the show with you is just the feeling that people these days feel really overwhelmed. That's what comes to mind by the
Yes,
process. Is that kind of what you sense as well?
absolutely. Yeah. And I think that was a big part of kind of having a presence on social media and wanting to bring the College Navigators to a social media platform to really build transparency in the process. I've worked both in college admissions as well on the high school side, so have a lot of familiarity with kind of the business side of what goes into college admission decisions and those institutional priorities, all those things that parents don't necessarily know are going on behind the scenes, but then also that perspective that students have preparing their applications. And so I think it's so important to try to bring transparency to the process because kind of knowledge is power and it takes away some of that stress and anxiety. If you understand there's only so much of the admissions process that you actually have control over, and the
Mm-hmm.
rest of it, it's going to vary year from year, whether this is child 1 or child 4. Every
Mm-hmm.
year brings its own challenges. There's always these curveballs that get thrown in. So no matter how well you prepare for things change along the way. So just if I can educate parents and students as much as possible, just control what you can control, and the rest of it is going to work out. And just kind of trust the process and know that you will end up where you are meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, that releases a little bit of that stress and anxiety.
Yeah, yeah, those are such great words of wisdom that I think that's part of that overwhelm is we are trying to mentally control it all. I want this college to think this about me or this or whatever, but we can only do what we do, and then the rest is up to them. But
Right.
we do still have to present ourselves in the most. I mean, assuming we're being high schoolers at the moment, by we I mean kids, present ourselves in the best light, and so. What is it? I'm sure this is I assume the most common question, what is it that they're looking for these days in a student?
So it's really about a match. And I think that's the part that students don't necessarily totally grasp in the process. I think for so long, it's, if I work hard and I do all these things, check all these boxes, therefore, I get the good grade, I get the reward. And with college, it's much more of a match process, especially as you get to the more highly selective schools. So I always say this is probably like a cheesy comparison, but I always say it's almost like dating, right? Like
Oh,
you can see people and just visually think like, oh, I bet you they'd be like really fun to date, or they would be a great catch, or well, and the more you get to know them, or the more you start communicating, you realize maybe your values aren't as aligned as you thought. Maybe, you don't have as much in common as you thought. And that's really what the college process is all about. And for so many, especially with the highly selective schools, they're really analyzing those supplemental essays that you're writing to try to see how your strengths, your interests, your values, your character all aligns with the school. And every
mm,
school is looking for something different. And what can be totally right for one school makes you completely wrong for the other. And yet you're still the same applicant, but is it a very research driven school? Is it a very service oriented school? And so you're going to thrive in one and not in the other. And it's really
mhm.
about finding that place where you're going to thrive and you're going to do well. And in a lot of ways, I know students take it so personal because sometimes a college rejection, right? Such a strong word,
Yeah.
is the first time that they've heard no in their life. And it's not a
Mm,
reflection of their self-worth at all. And in
mhm.
hindsight, I always say to parents, when they're so upset, like they didn't get to go to this school, and like 6 months down the road when they're at the school that they're going to, it's like, wow, I'm so glad it didn't work out this way. Like I couldn't be happier with where I ended up. But sometimes in the thick of it, it hurts, but it's not personal. And like
Yeah.
it's about making that match and finding the right place. I know when I worked in college admissions, I worked in two very different types of schools. I worked at the University of Tampa and I worked at Marymount Manhattan, which is now merging with Northeastern. Marymount Manhattan, it didn't matter what major a student was going into, they loved the theater and arts and just dance, all of that at the core of who they were. Like if
Mhm.
they had free time on the weekend, they were going to a Broadway show, they were going to a museum, right? Not every student would thrive there. And colleges can read, a student's application and know this is a student that would love this atmosphere. This is a student
Mm.
that would not. And like I said, nothing against the student, they're building their community just as much as you're trying to find your own.
Mm, that's such really good insight and perfect analogy that you use because I think back to exes, and
Right.
I'm thinking, thank God that didn't work out. That would have been a disaster, right? So it's like the perfect way, and it can be hard. Also, I can see from a high schooler's point of view who, they haven't had that life perspective quite as much as an adult has. So I think they can understand it in theory or in concept, but to
Right.
like really feel it and to grasp it and to accept it is like a
Yeah.
whole nother ball game. So, when you are working, because you do all this awesome stuff on Instagram, like I fell in love with you on Instagram because to me, I was like, oh, like seeing the numbers and the statistics
Yeah.
you post about different schools. So, it just opened my eyes like, wow, 90,000 applications for this school and only this many were accepted. And this, so like, paint me the picture of how that is important and like relevant as far as applying. Like, how do I know where I want to apply based off of your statistics? Or is that like, a way to go off of it? Like, I don't want, what I'm kind of getting at is I think people get afraid
Yeah.
straight. And so then they don't want to take the risk. So walk me through your thought process with that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely share the stats, and especially because so much has changed, even just like post pandemic, in terms of where students are applying, the difference in acceptance rates. Like we could look at Auburn and go back 5 or 6 years, and it was around an 85% acceptance rate. Now it's at like 45%. So very quickly, things have changed and shifted. And I think, again, people don't always understand this as they're going into the process. And sometimes they think, oh, anybody can get into this school or this is very easy. And then they're shocked. So just trying to share statistics so that they can make a very balanced list, knowing that, we're going to apply to these schools, but we may or may not get into versus maybe these schools we might, so
Mm-hmm.
that at the end, you hopefully have this nice solid list that I always say, if you were to get denied to every single school on your list, do you still love that one that's left enough that you would actually go there, right? We should be building this list with lots of different options. The other thing is we don't know. It's you go into this process so early, like many of the students are starting to work on their applications right now that are rising seniors, and who they are now is going to be very different than who shows up in May of their senior year when it's decision time. So
Mm-hmm.
also taking into account making a list that maybe right now you're adamant, you're jumping on a plane, you're going 1,000 miles away from home, you're going to a big school,
Uh-huh.
and then it might come around and that version, senior version self may not want that anymore. You might want a smaller school. You might want to just be able to drive home on the weekends if you are able to. And so making sure that list is shaped enough so that you do have lots of options, because like I said, you never know who's showing up.
Yeah.
Also important too. So just trying to there's so many different options out there. Just trying to spread awareness for students to kind of understand the big picture.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great advice. And so, why is it that these days it just seems like things have gotten so much more competitive, especially like you kind of said post pandemic? Like
Mhm.
what is happening that's changed?
Um, it's such a loaded question. I think n- information causes more panic always, right? So then you see
Mhm.
more numbers, you think I need to add more. Um, I think students are just much more aware. Like if we think back, at least for me, I don't know about you, but when I applied to college, I don't even think I applied to more than five. So
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
just like now there's so much information out there. It's so easy to apply, right? You have the common application, which is what most students use to apply to college, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a common application that you can very easily submit, applications to multiple schools. So we can look at, say, University of Texas at Austin that just joined 2 years ago and now have seen like a 35,000 plus,
Mm.
increase in applications because of the ease of accessibility. So that can often drive application numbers up. Sometimes schools are very big on giving free waivers to lots of students, so that'll increase. And then I always say, don't doubt the sports effect. Anytime you see a school have a winning season, whether it's basketball or football, all of a sudden that drives applications. So it comes from a lot of different directions. And just different trends. After COVID, we saw lots of students leave the Northeast to want to go south. And in the beginning, it was driven just because schools in the North were going back still with virtual education, wearing
Mm.
masks, limited contact, whereas you go down south and it was completely open and they could be, living this normal college experience. And then of course they tell all their friends that are juniors or sophomores still in high school. And now you're building that rapport, and people want to go. So lots of kind of shifting factors.
Oh, that makes so much sense because I have noticed the SEC schools or the Southern schools have just become insanely popular and like with the Northern audience coming down.
Yeah.
And by the way, I didn't mention I used to live in Boston for 9 years. So I'm like totally familiar with that part of the country. And yeah, it just seems like that has been really strong. And I didn't know, I was thinking it was the weather, but yeah, you're right. Like, I guess I can see that COVID effect on kids wanting to just like go maskless. And then it kind of had that ripple effect. And then they have younger siblings and younger friends and the popularity grows from where they are. So that makes a lot of sense. The other thing that and I don't know a lot about this, like kind of sociology kind of part of it, but I have seen apparently there has been I guess there's a big baby boom. So the largest senior class ever in our high school is my daughter's grade, who's the rising senior. And it's literally the biggest number that will have ever graduated from that high school. So there's something about like the year 2007, 2008, that all of a sudden there's this huge baby boom. Is that like kind of what you've experienced as well?
So technically, very true for your high school. Technically, in general, for the United States, the class of 2025, the one that just graduated,
Yes.
was the largest in general,
Oh, okay.
United
Yeah.
States. And
Yeah.
then between now and 2041, it's going to be on a decline.
Mm.
However, some of that has to be taken with a grain of salt because there are states that are still going to see huge increases in that time. Texas being one of them, Florida, Georgia, some of the Carolinas, whereas you're going to have states like California and New York that are going to see significant, like 27% plus declines in the number of graduates, whereas some of the states like Florida is like a 12% increase. Texas, I think, was maybe 16 or higher. I don't remember the exact, but so some of the states are going to become even more competitive. And when you look at states like, say, Texas or Florida, that primarily admit the bulk, Texas students or Florida students where they have caps on enrollment, it's going to make it even that much harder for the in-state kids there because they still have growing populations. So that is also going to be an interesting fact. That I see a lot of people comment, well, the population is going to go down. And it's like, yes, as a whole, we'll also see some of the smaller private schools that are just barely meeting enrollment now. They're going to end up closing. You'll see a lot of colleges close over the next, through 2041. But some of these other competitive schools might just continue to get even more competitive because of their state still growing.
Interesting. Yeah. In fact, I think I did see one of your posts about 2025 being the biggest class ever. I think that's where I first heard it. And then, yes. And I was thinking, well, what happened back in those years? And I realized, well, maybe 2008 is when our economy kind of started to collapse. And so maybe like that started the trend of like the downward, but although you're saying in some of the states, it still continued to increase. So who knows, like, I'm not going to play into the economy of the world and all those things when it comes to this. So anyway, when I have tried to educate myself about the college admissions process, and I'm really very hands off, I'm letting my daughter handle it with her advisor, and I'm kind of just assisting when needed. But I was always under the assumption that, the scores are important. Whether or not the school accepts the scores is another issue. But if they do, great. GPA, important. But I'm wondering if it's true that they're really looking for a well-rounded student, or is that just something that I've created in my own head?
I would say that was more true a couple years ago. So
Okay.
I'll kind of answer this two-part.
Yeah.
I think there's always a lot of confusion between GPA and SAT and how that helps you getting into colleges, because
Okay.
what colleges are looking at is they're looking at your academic achievements in context to your high school. So, your GPA in comparison to other students at your school, how much rigor did you take in terms of what was available to you? So, you could have, say, a 3.75 and a 1400. At your school, that might just make you average. At another school, that might put you at the top of the class. And so
Mm,
that's really what colleges are looking for, to see how are you in context to what was available to you. So that's a little bit of a shift, because it's no longer this just because you have a certain GPA or SAT that's good enough. It's more or less, how are you kind of comparing to other students in your school, and how much did you take advantage of what you had available to you?
mhm.
And then what was the other part was
Well, I'm curious about the well-roundedness of the
oh,
student besides just the academics.
so colleges are now looking more depth of involvement and impact over students spreading themselves thin. So I always
Mm,
say, like, while it's great to maybe dabble your feet in a couple of different things, they know realistically you can't do a million different things and do them well and have lots of impact, because there's only so many hours a week. So as much as colleges are they're trying to have a well-rounded campus, they don't need an individual student per se to be well-rounded. They want a student that's going to
ah,
come in and be that theater kid, the student to come in and be the tuba player, the student to come in and be the athlete and be the best tuba player, be the best, rather than just doing a little bit of everything. So I
mm,
always tell students, pick a couple things that you really love to do and do a lot in them, because then naturally comes the leadership, comes the impact in the community, comes the extra responsibilities that you get to take on. And when you are applying to those more highly selective schools and they ask you questions like, talk about a meaningful impact you had in a community, why do you want to come to this school? What are some of your intellectual curiosities? Why this major? You have so much to share because you've done so much in something, versus kind of like you said, that well-rounded, then that's not really, you don't have a lot of depth to talk about.
that clears up just a lot of like I think misconception I had in my
Yeah.
mind. And the other thing I don't know how true this is or not is my assumption is that a college is looking for a student to be successful in their college so that they can go on to have a successful career. And it's a good creates a better reputation for that college. B, it creates future donors to give money back to their college, right? If their
Yeah.
students are successful. And there's got to be like some other benefit, but like, is that kind of like what they have in mind, or what is it?
Yeah, absolutely. They are looking for all of that. I think kind of hidden behind that, what people miss a lot is, at the end of the day, college is a business. And so everything is really driven by the institutional needs that are set by the board. And so if a college has a certain vision in mind of the direction that they're going and what type of students they need to enroll to fulfill whatever those goals are, that is very much going to drive the decisions that are made in the applicant pool. So if they're looking to increase, this is a big one lately, the number of students from rural and small communities, right? Either you have that or you don't. If
Mm-hmm.
they're looking to, maybe they're running short on dorm space, so they need to have more local students versus out-of-state students. So there's
Mm-hmm.
all of these institutional priorities, majors they're growing, majors they're shrinking or doing away with. And so you don't necessarily know. Sometimes the colleges will tell you, like Rice has come out and said, look, we're looking to grow over the next several years. They're going to admit more. But there's other schools, Texas A&M, saying we're going to be dialing it back the next couple of years. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they tell you, but then other times you have no idea, or sometimes things happen in the middle of the year. Like the middle of this past cycle, Yale came out in the middle and said, oh, we're going to be able to take an extra 100 kids this year. So sometimes we know these things, other times we don't. And as an applicant, you may completely check all those boxes, or it may completely work against you. And like I said, what will work for one school and put you at an advantage at one school might completely work against you at another. And you really have done nothing different.
Yes, yes. Okay, that's so interesting. And then what is your philosophy on a student feeling like they might be more successful at like an quote unquote easier school versus being challenged at a quote unquote more difficult school? Like, what is like your advice for people on that?
So it's kind of that like big fish in a small pond, or right?
Yes.
That analogy.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, I mean, my biggest advice is to visit the campus, because I think it's very easy to sit at home and think you might know. And until you walk on the campus and start feeling out what the environment is like, what the students are like, all colleges will have admitted student days in the spring. So feel like when you visit in the fall as a prospective student versus when you go back as an admitted student is very,
Mhm.
very different. And when you
Mhm.
can surround yourself by the people that you would be calling roommates or friends, it gives you an idea of what environment you're going to thrive best in. Some
Mhm.
students really need to be that big fish in the small pond. Other students are driven more by other people that are going to push them up even higher because they're just like them. So it really is going to be an individual. I think it's a good idea to apply to both types of environments, because again, you
Mm.
don't know until you step foot on campus. Um,
Mhm.
and you have to look at your long-term goals too. I think a lot of times students will shy away from certain types of schools that might actually push them even more. For example, you have a lot of small liberal arts colleges that don't have either they don't have graduate programs at all, or they're very small graduate programs. So all of their efforts and work and research and internships, everything goes to the undergraduates. And they do such a good job of pushing students on to med school and law school and all these great post-grad opportunities with really good schools. And their whole reputation kind of lies on this because they don't
Mm.
have big feeder graduate programs. And so they do such a really good job that oftentimes when students say like, oh, I want to go to med school, or I want to go, like, don't discount those places, because some of them do the most amazing prep with a student, have the most unique opportunities, and like I said, have some of the highest success rates. And that's the other thing I think sometimes students don't realize, just like in high school, how undergraduate colleges accept students from all different types of high schools, right? All different states, public, private, Catholic, Christian, like all different types of schools. The same thing happens at the graduate level. So, if students want to go somewhere, big name, I always say it's not where you start, it's where you finish. So maybe you can't get into a certain school at the undergraduate level, but you're gung ho on getting there at the graduate level.
Mm.
Like, push through these great programs that have these great connections, that they're admitting students from all different types of undergraduate programs.
Oh, that's such really cool, a cool thought I hadn't thought of. And what do you think, just from a adult perspective in the job, world, in the kind of like job seeking, does it look better to have gone to two separate, like you're saying, like an undergrad and a graduate program at two separate schools? Or is there any benefit to like staying at the same school that offers, just like, sometimes there's like that dual credit where you can get your
Yeah.
undergrad and your master's if you take some of the same courses. I don't know what the terminology is for that, but
Yeah, yeah.
you know what I'm saying. Yeah.
I mean, there are those programs like you're talking about that are 3+2, 3+3, where you're applying and you get to get both your undergrad and your graduate, and you're kind of from the time you're admitted, and those have great saving discounts. So I would say, and a lot of them are highly
Mhm.
selective. So if you get in, absolutely. I also think there's something about going to two different schools that are usually in two different environments that expose you to more things as well. So
Mhm.
a lot of students at maybe age 18 aren't ready for more of, say, a big city, but
Mhm.
maybe they are really interested in the future and being in politics or want to work on Wall Street. Maybe then at grad school level, you go to that big city that maybe you didn't want that experience as an undergrad. You wanted that more traditional campus, but then for
Mhm.
grad school, then maybe you are going into where you will eventually be working.
Okay, really good. And it's so important to like you're saying, like think, what is the long-term goal here? Like, what am I even doing? Why am I doing this? And I think, just knowing the kids, because my clients are all teenagers, they're just thinking like kind of 1 year ahead. They're thinking like, where would be fun to live, or where has good weather, or where are there cool people? A few of them I know are have thinking, well, where do I want to end up living? Like, but that's how they're selecting, like literally based
Yeah.
off geography and not necessarily based off of, I'm sure you're getting nodding. Yes, you see this a lot. Not necessarily based off of the actual career aspirations or whatever. So, how do you guide those teenagers to connect with those longer term goals?
Yeah, no, it's definitely difficult. And I'll hear so many times students will say, like, I didn't get into my dream school. And I'm like, well, why was it your dream? Give me like 3 to 5 like good solid reasons besides
Yeah.
the sports and the location. Like, why
Yeah.
was it your dream? And a lot of times they can't get off the surface level. So it
Yeah.
just kind of goes to show, like you said, they kind of know the same like 20, 30 schools. But I think the biggest thing is it doesn't have to be a linear path, right? Just in life in general, we know this as adults now looking back, life takes twists and turns, and it's all about being flexible and open. And most colleges allow flexibility, meaning most of them will allow you to come in, start taking classes, figure out what you want to do, and then declare a major. There's only so many colleges out there that are direct admit, right? That you have to go directly into their nursing program or directly into their engineering program. So it's okay not to know. And I think the biggest advice I can always give is to not compare yourself to others as you're going through this process, that you're always going to be behind somebody. Somebody's going to be ahead of you, right? But you're also ahead of somebody else in the process. And so that's where I think the stress and anxiety comes in of, well, I don't know what I want to major in, or, I still have to take more testing, or, I have to get grades up to get into certain schools. And that's okay. This is your unique path. And I always say the reward at the end of college is you get to work for the next 50 years, right? So we want to spend the time and invest in ourselves, that
Yeah.
whatever we're doing, we like and we enjoy, and we're not basing our decisions off of our friends or, what our parents necessarily want to do. Yes, they're paying the bill. So obviously influence, but meaning like
Yeah.
you're not picking majors because of somebody else. You're not picking a school because of somebody else. Like this is you that's going to have to live and breathe and do the work. And then you're going to have to do something at the end that leads to a full-time job. And I always say, if you love what you do, the money will follow. If you love what you do every
Mm,
day and you get up, you're invested, the money's going to come. So don't make decisions just based on, well, this will pay me the most. Because if you're miserable every day, I
yeah.
guarantee you're going to top out real quick. You're going to hate your life, and you're really not going to be as financially successful as you think, because you're going to be totally locked into a life that you don't love. So I think for students just going into this whole college admissions process with an open mind, and know that it's okay not to have the answers, and realize that they are 18 and they have lots of room to grow. And even if they get through the 4 years and are still slightly confused, you have opportunities to go to grad school. You can do some great internships that will direct you and guide you. You don't have to have it all figured out. So have some
yeah.
time.
And I almost feel like giving these kids who are undecided or undeclared almost like a script, because I remember, and I have very strong, vivid memories of me after high school, pre-college. My parents' friends were all like, what are you going to major in? What are you going to major in? First it's, where are you going to go? Where are you going to, it's like the questions. And then it's like, what are you and I remember feeling like just this kind of level of insecurity that I didn't have a good answer. And almost like if we could, like, the answer could be proud. And if a teenager could just say, well, I'm going to explore my options and take lots of classes, and I'll figure it out when I figure it out. Right. Like if there's like a strong, powerful response to that, then you don't feel, because that's, I think, like the pressure starts to build and you're like, why don't I know? Everybody else knows. And what's wrong with me? All those questions.
Absolutely. And really in the end, they tend to be the ones that do better, because if you have such a narrow perspective, and yes, absolutely, there is a percentage of the population that knows what they want to do and they make it to be doctors, right? Or they make it to
Yeah.
be whatever it is. Like there is that small percent, but I would say you've got that undecided, but then you also have a huge percent that say they know what they want to do, and they get there and they very quickly realize that that is not what they thought they signed up for. There's so many times I'll talk to students and they'll say like, oh, I want to, go into forensics. It's so cool. I watch CSI. And I'm like, oh, so you really like chemistry? Oh no, I hate chemistry. What do we think is forensics? Like, do we really know what forensics involves? Do we really know what
Yeah.
major is all about? And so
Yeah.
many times they're just basing all of these things because of things they see or hear. And
Mm,
until they're sitting in the classroom, that's why I say being undecided is sometimes just the best place to be, because there's no expectations, there's no levels of disappointment. You're not building up all these things for yourself that you have to, because you've told everybody this is what you're doing and now it's going to be this letdown. Like you said, let's be proud of, I'm going to college to figure it out. That's the whole reason I'm going, is to figure out what I want to do.
yes. Yeah. That's so fantastic. And so walk us through when someone says, I need help, I need coaching, or however you call your service, I guess,
Yeah.
consultancy services.
Yeah.
What is it like for them to work with you? And I know you mentioned you have a private program and a group program. So can you
Yeah.
tell everybody what that's like?
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like it's important for me to say, like, you do not have to hire a college consultant. I think sometimes that is pressure that parents feel that they hear other parents doing it. And so now I think I have to get one. And that's absolutely not the case. There is tons of just free information out there, tons of free sessions you can go to. Even colleges themselves have so many webinars that you can attend just teaching you about, how to apply to college. There's a whole free website called Access that will help you with the Common App. So there's tons of free information out there if you're willing to take the time and navigate. I've also heard parents say, like, this is straining me and my child's relationship. So I don't
Yeah.
want that. And I'd rather let somebody else organize the process, and they'll listen to you. They won't listen to me. So
Right.
I get that too. So I do. I work with some students one-on-one and just kind of meet them where they are in the process. Some still need help building lists. Some are working on their essays or need help brainstorming, putting the application together. I also have a group counseling that I do with students. So it's more, I always say this is very flexible. You can kind of join when you want, leave when you want. There's 2 live webinars a month. Everything is recorded, so they can always go back and see things that they might have missed. They get all the guides and worksheets. So there's obviously a big component that needs to be independent on their part, but they can still get kind of that whole insight at a fraction of the price of individual counseling. And then I also just do application reviews. So if somebody wants to completely work on their own and then just reach out and say, hey, can you take a look at this before I send it to colleges? That's also super helpful, because a lot of times students just have a very hard time talking about themselves. Usually, when you're in school, you're writing reports about books or history lessons or whatever, but you're not usually writing in that first person. And it's so hard for students to learn how to really just like advocate and brag for themselves. And so sometimes
Mm.
it's just easy to take something that they've been trying to kind of explain and say, oh, let's like really push this or highlight this more. You're totally not getting across to somebody that's never met you, never seen you. This is the first thing they know about you. They're not totally grasping maybe all of your involvement or all of your achievements.
Yes, yes. Okay, last question is, in those college essays, is it important? I guess I'm asking, like, what are the factors? Like, I'm thinking, because my daughter's really wanting to be original in her essay.
Yeah.
Like, she feels like that's the most important thing. And,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, there's only so many ideas that even exist. I'm sure there's like infinite numbers of combinations of ideas, but right themes, I guess. And
Mhm.
so is it more important for that, or like, what is it that they really want to read in those essays?
Actually, your daughter's correct. They just want people who are real and very authentic. And it's the small moments, small stories that have the biggest impact. I mean, college admission officers know they're 17, 18 years old. They, typically don't have crazy, crazy life experience. Some do, but I mean, for the most part, there's not going to be these dramatic stories, right, that go
Yeah.
into it. And so it's really the goal of the essay is for them just to learn more about the student's character, their values, their interests, their intellectual curiosities. They want to learn something that is not already talked about elsewhere in their application. So
Mm.
we have an idea from the activities list that they've provided, what activities they're in. They know their grades. Their teachers have written recommendation letters. You have those supplemental essays that those are college specific that they might be asking, like I said, why this major, or, why a certain community. So you've kind of answered all of those. So this can just be very you. Like, who are you outside of all of this? Are you somebody that, if you have a free weekend, you're deep diving crime documentaries, then write about it? Are you a
Yeah.
student that is the go-to baker in your family, that every event they're, you're the person they reach out to and you make these like fun, elaborate cakes and you want to talk about them? Maybe you grew up, I always say, don't take for granted where you live. Everybody grows up very differently. I had a student last year write about he grew up on a farm. It's a working farm, and all his responsibilities that he had growing up. And that's so different from the schools he was applying to and where they were located and probably the type of students that were going. So just, I always say, keep it simple. Don't try to overdo it. Think about things that are meaningful in your life, or things that maybe paint a good picture of who you are. Does this show you in the best light? I always say, pretend you're first day of school at a new school where nobody knows you. What would you want to
Mhm.
share about yourself? What would you want them to
Ah,
know about you?
yeah.
Um, if if there's question marks, I say you probably don't want to write about that, right? Always, like I
Yeah.
said, ask yourself, does this show me in the best light? But keep it light, keep it real, keep it authentic. It should sound like a 17-year-old read it. I always say parents
Mm,
definitely read over it, but don't try to edit it crazy for them
yeah.
because it doesn't sound like a 17-year-old anymore. And it's not so much about, they're not looking for grammar and punctuation as much as they are just trying to hear the story. That's what they're trying to get out of it. It's not a paper. And I think the other thing students really
Okay.
struggle with is, I always say, don't think of it as like a book report. Think of it like writing a book. You should be telling a story. The reader should have this very clear understanding of who you are. Instead of saying like, I fell off a bike, instead of just telling them what happened, you described, I was riding down this super bumpy road, dust was in my face, I was sweating down my back, and next thing I know, I woke up a stick between my tire, right? Now we have this whole vision of
Mm,
who you are, what you were going through, what you were feeling, as if we were reading a book versus,
mm,
I fell off my bike. Which one has more impact? So if you can
yeah.
think of it as telling a story, it'll be much more impactful. And then just keep in mind, these admission officers, they're reading 50, 80, 100 a day. So you have
Yeah.
to capture their attention from the get-go because you don't want them just like blowing it off or breezing through it. So
Yeah.
catch their attention.
Okay, that's such amazing advice. And I'm sure I could ask you 100 more questions. I mean, this is just, such a big topic right now. So how can people find you going forward?
Yeah, probably the easiest is just to go to Instagram, which is the College Navigators. And website is just the same, thecollegenavigators.com. But I would say Instagram is probably the easiest. And I share lots of free advice. I have lots of free guides. So again, if you can't invest or don't want to invest in a college consultant, there's so much free stuff that you can grab that will help you brainstorm essay ideas, give you tips for filling out the activity section, give you a timeline for the process just to keep you on track.
Awesome. Well, Jenna, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I'm sure the listeners got a ton of value out of this. So again, thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.